Hey guys, tonight we journey back into a world where your evening cup of coffee might not just keep you awake, but possibly get you arrested or at least earn you some suspicious glances from the Sultan. Picture this, the warm glow of lanterns poured across winding Ottoman streets, the air vibrating with the low thrum of oud music, and somewhere nearby, the gentle clatter of cups filled to their brims with dark, foamy coffee. It sounds cozy, until you realize that Ottoman rulers weren't always thrilled about their people gathering in coffee houses, whispering secrets over tiny cups. You probably wouldn't survive too long if you were caught turning your evening latte into a political salon. Fortunately, you're only visiting tonight in imagination, wrapped in blankets instead of silk robes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time your clock reads right now. It's always fascinating to imagine how this story lands, differently depending on whether you're catching it in a midnight hush or a lazy Sunday afternoon. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step quietly into a coffee house tucked into the shadows of Istanbul's old quarters. The wooden door creaks and then swings open into warmth, carrying the smell of roasted beans. Smoke curling just above the lamps like a veil someone forgot to lower. It's crowded but soft, the sort of place where the voices overlap in gentle ripples, not sharp edges, like layers of water folding into each other. The wooden stools are low and slightly wobbly, the kind that force you to sit nearer the ground, feet planted, back bowed, just enough to remind you you're a guest clinging to the rhythm of another world. You take your place. Someone glances up his turban wrapped in loops of fabric so precise it must have taken 10 minutes to tie this morning, but he only nods, once before returning to his game of backgammon by the wall. The clatter of dice punctuates the hum. In front of you, a copper tray gleams. 2 cups, tiny in porcelain, nested like doves, waiting to be lifted. You've seen bigger espresso shots, but this isn't a drink meant for gulping. It's a sip and linger kind of evening, where the coffee is as much about listening as tasting. You hear merchants by the window murmuring about the caravans still delayed from Aleppo. A fisherman laughs quietly to his apprentice over some private joke, drowning in shadows. And drifting just above it all is the scent, the unmistakable perfume of beans roasted until almost black, ground into a fine powder softer than flour, then stirred into water until foam crowns the top like a little edible crown. This isn't just a cafe. It feels like stepping into the pause between heartbeats of the city itself. On the quiet streets outside, torches flicker on walls glazed with salt air from the Bosporus. But in here, time bends. You could believe that somewhere in these benches, history waits to be overheard. You notice how everyone is watching something in visible words, waiting to land. This is no simple tavern. Here, ideas are brewed just as carefully as the coffee. Historians today agree. The coffee house in the Ottoman world was a nervous invention, a place where men gathered for more than their drink. It was a place for politics, without listening ears in uniform, for poetry exchanged on a whim, for gossip galloping faster than a horse down the street. One chronicler even described the coffee house as schools of the wise and of the foolish alike, which sounds exactly like any group chat today. But here's the intriguing part you don't learn on your average tourist brochure. For many first-time patrons, the coffee wasn't just a beverage, it was a shock. People used to wine or water were suddenly jolted into wakefulness. Imagine some poor fellow in the 1500s first sipping this jet-black miracle and spending the night wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling tiles, wondering if the drink itself were magic or possibly cursed. Wouldn't you secretly be a little suspicious? And yet, the drink caught fire, not with explosions, but with the slow burn of ritual. When you lift the heavy porcelain cup, you feel its warmth pressing against your skin. Foam tickles your lip, it's both bitter and sweet, sharp yet grounding. The drink leaves behind a residue so thick you can practically scoop it with a spoon. Some say coffee's grit foretold fortunes in the patterns left inside the cup. Is that smear at the bottom shaped like a crescent moon, or just your unsteady hand? Historians still wonder how sincerely those predictions were believed, or whether it was mostly an excuse to linger and gossip longer. Asterisk for you. Sitting here, the question doesn't matter much. What matters is the hazy comfort of the room, the way the lantern's smoke leans toward the beams, the wood absorbed with decades of chatter, and the little sigh you hear from the man beside you as he stirs sugar into his cup. Conversation never sharpens into arguments here. Nothing feels rushed. The night stretches like dough, soft and patient, under careful hands. Asterisk, and so, you let your shoulders sink lower. You let yourself pretend you're part of this hum, a guest with no errands waiting in tomorrow's dawn. From the corners of the hall, shadows drift in little pools around the benches. The chatter softens now, as though even the voices here understand your eyelids are growing heavy. Coffee may be a waking drink, but in this place, under this narration, it becomes paradoxically soothing. The closer you listen, the calmer you feel, as though all the urgency has been brewed out of it. Asterisk, here in the coffee house, the empire outside might rise and fall. Rulers might gesture imperially from their palaces, drums might echo in parade squares, but around you, time is frozen, suspended in the steam that rises from a simple, stubborn cup of coffee. You stroll back in time, tracing the winding roads, not just through the city of Istanbul, but across seas and deserts, the journey of the bean itself. Long before it found its way into those cozy Ottoman coffee houses, in your hand, you can almost feel the small, stubborn seed, slick and weighty, a traveler in its own right, before the Ottoman world claimed coffee as its companion in politics and poetry. The humble bean had already traveled more miles than most of its drinkers ever would. Asterisk, the earliest whispers point southward. In the high plateaus of Ethiopia, not in fancy porcelain cups or shining copper pots, but in the rugged hillsides where coffee plants once grew wild. You picture goats leaping about, their eyes just a little too bright, as if they've had one too many cups, or rather, one too many berries. Legend insists that it was a herder named Kaldi who noticed his goats bounding around like enthusiastic toddlers on a sugar rush after nibbling the cherries of a strange shrub. Naturally, Kaldi decided to try the berries himself. Bravery or poor judgment, you decide. Soon, he was buzzing with energy. Historians agree coffee plants are native to that region, but whether Kaldi really existed, or was simply a folk mascot for the bean's discovery, is anyone's guess. Goats don't usually keep diaries, so the mystery remains. Asterisk, from Ethiopia. The story spreads east across the Red Sea, into Yemen. Here, coffee took on more defined form, not just berries chewed whole, but beans roasted, ground, and steeped. In mosques and Sufi lodges, the drink was embraced not as a rowdy stimulant for partying goats, but as a patient companion in long nights of prayer. Imagine sitting cross-legged with Sufi mystics in Yemen around the 15th century. Hours of chanting, spinning, and meditation softened by the steady cups of dark liquid steaming at their side. The coffee lent them the stamina to move through candlelit nights, and perhaps the kind of alert calm that made mystical union feel a little closer. Asterisk, the Yemeni port city of Mosha. Yes, the name behind the cafe menu item you've probably mispronounced once or twice became synonymous with the bean, shipping it by dhow across the Indian Ocean to Persia, Egypt, and eventually the Ottoman heart. The smell alone must have been enough to hook travelers' ships drifting into port with holds full of beans. So pungent their scent clung to sails and planks long after the cargo was unloaded. Coffee was already gaining a reputation as a global wanderer, long before it touched European lips. Asterisk, by the mid-16th century, the Ottomans had fully embraced coffee as something more than a foreign novelty. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent himself was said to enjoy the drink, lending it royal glamour. And yet, even with such backing, coffee's journey wasn't without turbulence after all. People debated not only its taste, but its morality. Was it nourishing, sinful, a miracle, or a menace? Some Islamic scholars praised it as sharpening the mind for prayer. Others argued its stimulating effects were suspiciously close to intoxication. How could something so tiny stir such weighty controversies? You'll notice no one was having this debate about boiled cabbage. Asterisk, and yet, as the Ottomans pulled the beans into their orbit, they secured a monopoly on the trade with fierce insistence. Yemeni coffee beans were initially exported only after being roasted or parboiled, making sure no one could grow fresh plants outside their control. It was a global supply chain strategy centuries before the phrase could bore people at business schools. Still, smugglers eventually found ways, sneaking fertile beans out of Mocha, passing them secretly across borders. Historians wonder just how many delicious cups existed, thanks to those who risked everything hauling contraband beans. Asterisk. In this history of miles and disputes, you taste the quiet irony. Humanity always finds its way back to the comforts that hold us steady. The goat chewing berries, the monk stirring a pot, the sultan sipping from an ornamented cup, all anchored themselves to the same sensation of warm, bitter liquid slipping down the throat. It became more than a drink. It was fuel for conversations, prayers, journeys, and whole ways of seeing the world. Asterisk. Imagine yourself stepping onto one of those ships at Mochacells, catching a warm wind, wooden boards creaking under salty water. Everywhere you turn, burlap sacks are stacked high, the beans whispering a scent like roasted wood and earth. Sailors lean on rails, eager for your help carrying heavy loads. Melodic, though honestly, you'd likely prefer to sit and admire the view, rather than playing A gull arcs overhead, cackling in a way that makes you think the bird knows more about the bean's future than you do. Asterisk. Above all, the journey feels like it was written for a bedtime walk like this. The pace is slow measured, like waves slapping against boat hulls. Time stretches the way, roasted beans stretch aroma. You can visualize Yemen fading on the horizon, the minarets distant and curved, while ahead loom visions of bazaar stalls in Cairo, Aleppo, Damascus, and finally the cobbled maze of Istanbul, each marketplace layered with spices, silk, perfumes, and sun coffee steaming from nearby stalls. Asterisk. The spread of coffee, though inevitable now in hindsight, wasn't guaranteed. Tea already held its crown in many regions, and wines haunted others. But somehow, coffee slipped in through narrow cracks, through religion, through trade, through the irresistibility of its dark perfume. What modern historians still debate is whether its popularity spread more quickly from pleasure or practicality. Was it the sweetness of long nights made lively and talkative, or the steady hand it gave to bureaucrats writing scrolls past midnight? The answer, as with most things, slipped somewhere in between. Asterisk. All you know, leaning on a soft pillow while holding your imaginary cup, is that tonight, you're invited to taste the slow unfolding of this journey. Ethiopia's hills, Yemen's docks, Ottoman ships crossing the sea, steering their way toward empires, and toward a ritual destined to last longer than those empires ever would. You follow the bean now past ports and palaces into the quiet ritual of roasting itself, a kind of alchemy, where simple seeds turn into something greater. The coffee house you first stepped into hasn't changed shape, but tonight your gaze is pulled, not to the chatter or the dice games in the corner, but to the fire in the back. There, in a long pan set over glowing charcoal, the beans roll with a gentle clatter. The sound is part crackle, part sigh, like tiny pebbles shifting in a dream. Asterisk. The smell comes in layers. First grassy, then toasty, then rich and almost chocolate thick. until it clings to your hair and sleeves. You can't help but imagine waking the next day and discovering you've become a walking advertisement for Eau de Ottoman roast. The roaster sits cross-legged by the pan, swaying slightly as he keeps the beans moving with a broad spoon. His face is calm, almost meditative, as though these turning seeds are prayer beads in disguise. The transformation is mesmerizing. Raw beans are pale, almost green and waxy, not at all the glamorous heroes you know later in the cup. Watching them darken feels like watching the sun set in miniature, pale to gold, gold to brown, then deeper, deeper still, by the time thin gray smoke begins to spiral upward into the rafters. The beans seem to hum with possibility. You don't need modern chemistry to sense that something powerful lurks in them now. It's true. Historians today point out how Ottoman roasters developed remarkable consistency, art, not just of flavor, but reputation. A badly roasted batch could ruin a cafe's standing, and customers were loyal to stalls where beans were treated with gentleness and skill. Imagine walking through Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, each stall unrolling fragrances into the air: leather, rosewater, spices, wool, and suddenly that smoky, nutty arc of roasting beans curling around each passing shopper. Which stall would you stop at? Obvious answer. The one where the smell is so rich your stomach growls, even without food. Here's a quirk you may not know. In the Ottoman world, homes often roasted their beans just before brewing, not in advance. The fresh crackle of roasting was as much a part of daily life as the drink itself. That means whole neighborhoods might smell like a roastery at dusk, when families prepared coffee before bedtime conversations. Can you picture that? Streets glistening with lamplight, while the air thickens with smoke so fine it feels like velvet brushing your skin. The roasting wasn't rushed but patient. The roaster controls the spoon like a conductor leading a quiet orchestra. Every stir ensuring even darkening. No single bean allowed to burn too fast. It's worth pausing to imagine just how difficult this would be for you. You, whose smoke alarms probably panic when you toast bread too enthusiastically. Here, though, the fire behaves like a partner, rarely flaring out of turn, coaxed into steady glow. And there's debate too, among coffee historians. What degree of roast did people prefer centuries back? Some claim the Ottomans preferred darker roasts, closer to what we call Turkish roast today, full of rich oils rising to the surface. Others suggest lighter roasts, dominated early on, sharper and fruitier in taste. The truth might well be both, depending on region, class, or mood. After all, taste buds aren't bound by royal decree. Imagine a scholar insisting, medium roast only, and the fisherman in the corner replying, "No thanks, friend. I'll take the darkest you've got." By now, your eyes trace the smoke curling upward, meeting the rafters, then vanishing into the night outside, and you sense the beauty of this alchemy. The entire empire distilled into smell and sound, the bean's hidden strength unlocked by fire. There's something ancient and reassuring about it, even playful. Humans, after all, adore rituals of transformation: bread from dough, wine from grapes, and coffee, humble coffee, from roasted seed. As you linger, your own senses melt into their pace. The crackle becomes a lullaby, the smoke a light blanket drifting across your thoughts. If modern life feels like coffee is your jolt awake, here in this place it feels like coffee is your lull into slower time. The bean loses its edges, and so do you, softened into quiet company with others watching, waiting, breathing together with the hearth. You realize the empire may have armies and governors, poets and architects, but it also has this, the everyday magic of a handful of beans transformed before your eyes. A miracle, repeated night after night, lovingly ordinary yet powerful enough to spin an entire social culture. And with that roasted scent still clinging to your imagination, you wait, because the next act is coming: the brewing. patient and precise. The careful pouring of steaming liquid into small waiting cups. The beans have cooled now, their skins flaking slightly from the pan, a quiet crackle fading into silence. Your eyes drift from the roasting fire to a different kind of performance, the brewing. That small but mighty copper pot the sezvis, brought forward, glowing in the firelight, like a piece of jewelry that decided work was more fun than decoration. It looks simple, almost modest, with its long handle jutting out like an impatient finger pointing toward you. But don't be fooled. This pot holds centuries of patience and practice. Asterisk, you watch as finely ground coffee, as soft as powder, is spooned into the sez. The grains catch on the edge, dusting the copper lip before sliding in. Then comes water, ladled gently, mingling to form a dark sludge at the bottom. To us, it might look a little more like mud than magic, but the Ottomans weren't aiming for quick clarity. They were brewing an experience. One sprinkle of sugar might be added, depending on preference, sweet, medium, or strong enough to make you question your life choices. The options were taken seriously enough that even today, ordering coffee in Turkey means declaring your sweetness level, like an oath. Asterisk the sez is placed directly into the embers, nestling into glowing ash. The fire whispers at the pot's bottom, coaxing heat upward. You barely notice it at first. The liquid gives nothing away, but after a minute or two, a tremor begins. Tiny bubbles shimmer on the surface, followed by a rising foam. That foam is everything. It's not decoration, it's identity. A good coffee is judged by its crown of froth. Too thin, and patrons lose faith in the brewer. Too wild, and you just burn the drink. The art lies in restraint, coaxing foam rather than bullying it into existence. Asterisk the man brewing the coffee lifts the sezv off the embers, examines the rising foam, and gently pours just a little into each cup to establish the frothy lid. Then, he returns the pot to the heat, coaxing it again before finishing the pour. It's a back and forth routine, a dance of pot and fire, repeated until the cups are filled. Foams settle in like golden crowns on tiny thrones of porcelain, and you can't help but smirk that this little ritual might carry more dignity than some royal ceremonies you've heard of. Asterisk, the aroma builds louder than the whispers around you. If smells had voices, this one would be singing baritone, a low, smooth hum that speaks directly to your chest. It's a fragrance of roasted nuts, of caramel edges, of heat-made liquid. You find yourself leaning forward as though hypnotized. The sezv is carried over carefully on a round tray, its contents steaming softly in the dim light. Each step is measured, as if a stumble here would be nothing short of tragic opera. Asterisk historians note that Ottoman brewing was astonishingly consistent for its time. The sezv method is nearly unchanged from the 16th century to now, evidence that sometimes humanity does stumble upon the perfect process. Early and decides. No notes, 10/10, let's keep it forever. Others wonder whether the sezvi was first invented in Istanbul itself, or adopted from already brewing traditions in the Arab world. The debate remains unsettled, like which cousin really invented the family recipe. Whoever it was, we owe them. Thanks for designing a pot small enough to feel personal, large enough for sharing, durable enough to survive centuries. Asterisk, as cups are passed, you notice the etiquette. Never serve yourself first. Always with the right hand, and always with respect. Hosting coffee was a test of character, patience, hospitality, precision. In households, potential brides were sometimes judged by their brewing skills, as though marriage itself depended on foam's thickness. It's the kind of detail that makes you laugh softly in your seat. Imagine love itself hinging on a sezvi's performance. And yet, the practice held weight. A burned coffee might be forgiven, but a careless attitude toward the ritual was harder to overlook. Asterisk, the copper pot still sits by the fire, gleaming like a sun caught in miniature, ready for the next round. Its handle points outward again, almost smug, as if it knows it plays a central role in keeping empires caffeinated. Without it, perhaps, bureaucrats wouldn't have lasted their long nights over ledgers, poets wouldn't have finished their couplets, and soldiers wouldn't have lingered so long in quiet corners. Watching the brewing feels different than watching the roasting. Roasting is bold, public, aromatic. Brewing is private, intimate, almost tender, like watching someone button a tiny shirt with deliberate care. The zest whispers of patience, of a world that knew the virtue of slowing down. You might be tempted to compare it to your morning rush with a coffee pod machine. But here, there's no rushing. You sip only after the right foam forms. You wait while embers coax perfection. You listen to time soften, asterisk. You cradle your imaginary cup, small and hot, already crowned with foam. And the says still sitting by the fire, promises more. Promises conversations that will meander. Promises rituals passed down in kitchens and palaces. Promises that the small things, brewed gently, can carry empires within them. The cup is in your hand now, heavier than you expect for such a small thing. It's porcelain, cool at the rim. But the liquid radiates warmth through its delicate walls, as if defying physics by being both fragile and immovable. You tilt it carefully, and there it is, the foam, thick, velvety, golden brown. It shimmers under the lantern light, not in glittering brilliance, but in a softer glow, like the sheen on a cat drowsing in the sun. Ottoman poets claimed that the foam was the coffee's crown, the proof of its dignity. Others compared it to silk rippling in moonlight. You, less poetically inclined after a long day, might think it looks a bit like the sea's highest wave frozen in miniature. Either way, the point is clear. Without it, the drink is unfinished, like bread without a crust, or a bedtime story told without the final goodnight. That frothy cap is your ticket into the club of real coffee drinkers. You take a sip, and are instantly aware that this is no mild cafe latte. The coffee grips your tongue with bitterness first, then lets go with a lingering sweetness hidden deeper inside. Like a punchline delivered with perfect timing. It's thick, almost chewy, and, no, you don't mind at all. The grains sink to the bottom where they'll one day spell out fortunes for eager eyes, but for now, you simply savor. The first sip wakes your senses. The second feels familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. By the third, you're convinced. This tiny cup contains an entire philosophy about time, patience, and maybe a subtle reminder not to order an extra large paper cup with whipped cream and drizzle. What makes it even more striking is how slowly everyone drinks. No one is rushing. A cup this small might vanish in 2 gulps, if chugged. But here, each sip is measured, each pause meaningful. The men around you talk between sips, their voices dipping low and rising with laughter. The foam sticks stubbornly to the sides of their cups, clinging even as the liquid disappears. Foam was more than decoration in Ottoman belief, which is signal of quality, sometimes even reputation. Serve a cup with no foam, and you might as well admit defeat before the first taste. An odd little detail preserved in anecdotes. Some hosts would practice pouring for days before inviting guests, simply to master the delicate transfer from sesvi to cup, making sure the foam stayed intact. Imagine the pressure, your reputation in the neighborhood hanging not on your manners, your wit, or your charm, but on whether that thin golden layer stayed perched on top of the cup like a polite hat. Lovers of coffee can sympathize. Foam isn't just fluff, it's character. And yet, historians still debate whether foam was truly essential for flavor, or if it was pure aesthetics. Did it hold in the aroma? Did it alter the first taste? Or was it simply about presentation, about the drama of a crowned cup? It's a question without a final answer, a mystery that drifts like steam from the cup into the rafters, inviting speculation over each sip. Around you. The room grows softer, quieter, not in silence but in ease. someone begins to recite a poem, half-remembered lines about gardens blooming, hearts sighing, and coffee pouring like rivers through the soul. You laugh softly into your cup, because only in a place like this would such imagery pass without anyone rolling their eyes. The foam clings stubbornly to your lip, a small mustache that makes you feel part scholar, part sleepy fool. You wipe it away with as much dignity as you can manage, which isn't much. But thankfully no one is watching too closely. The drink holds warmth steady in your hand, a little lantern for your palm. Sip by sip, it turns the room into a slower, gentler place. The dice in the back clatter more softly now, as though even the game has been soothed by the foam's patient presence. The sweet, bitter balance in your mouth seems to echo the empire outside, always in tension, always on the edge of too much, one way or the other, but somehow still steady. You lean back, the foam disappearing gradually with each sip, and think of all the lives that once leaned this same way. Cups crowned in foam, pausing in conversation, their troubles for the moment contained in the bottom of a porcelain cup. There is something strangely democratic about this ritual. Poets, merchants, travelers, even you, a sleepy time traveler in disguise, all held equal by the foam on their coffee. The last remnants slide down your throat, leaving the grains settled at the bottom of the cup like a dark constellation. You don't know what it wants to tell you, yet the fortune will have to wait. For now, you're content with the echo of foam still lingering, a golden crown that stayed just long enough to remind you of its quiet reign. By now you've finished your cup, but the coffeehouse itself hasn't finished with you. The foam may have slipped back into memory, yet the atmosphere hums with the kind of conversation that can only be brewed slowly, like the drink itself. You lean forward slightly on your wobbly stool. Not because you want to be nosy though, let's be honest, you do, but because the air around you is alive with whispers. This, you realize, is not just a cafe. It's an information hub disguised as a place to sip bittersweet velvet from tiny cups. Across the room, two merchants lean close together, their heads bent almost conspiratorially. They're trading news about the price of silk along the caravan routes, murmuring names of cities as if they were charms. Aleppo, Damascus, Cairo. Each name feels like part of a spell, conjuring desserts and markets in your mind. The smell of roasted beans and the murmuring of bazaars almost overlap. You half expect little streams of spice, dust to curl out of their sleeves. To your left, a group of scholars debates philosophy. Though their hands move so much, it feels less like philosophy and more like competitive shadow puppetry. Their voices are calm but insistent, running from faith to law to astronomy. Every now and again, one of them pauses, sips deeply, smacks his lips, then declares his point, as if the foam on his coffee has validated it. This is one of the quirks historians love about Ottoman coffeehouses. They were penny universities before the phrase ever existed in Europe. For the price of a single cup, anyone could sit in a room spilling with knowledge, poetry, jokes, politics, and occasionally scandal. Think of them as the original Wi-Fi hotspots, only louder and with a stronger aroma. There's a particular weight in the air tonight. You sense this isn't idle chatter. It feels like news is being chewed on, passed from mouth to mouth, refined until it comes out in phrases sharp enough to make rulers nervous. After all, words are dangerous in their own way. Coffeehouses became places where gossip moved faster than horses galloping across the empire. A scandal whispered in Istanbul could echo in Bursa by the time the sun rose, making bean-fueled chatter both thrilling to those who loved it and deeply suspicious to those who feared it. One story slips through your ears like smoke. A visitor from the provinces tells of a governor replacing taxes with coffee bribes. It might be half true, it might be complete nonsense, but you lean in anyway. By the time the tale circles your table, it's been embroidered 3 times already. The governor now, drinking entire rivers of coffee and, somehow ruling his province from the bottom of a cup. Nobody here checks records. They're not looking for truth carved in stone. They're looking for laughter, for shared amusement, for tiny rebellions spoken lightly enough to mask their sting. Asterisk. And here's where the joke lies. While everyone pretends they are only here for the coffee, all of them are also here for the theater of words. The dice clatter, the oud hums from a corner, but the main act is on every tongue. A poet starts reciting a new verse, his cadence slow, matching the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Someone nearby mutters that his rhymes need another cup to wake up. Light laughter follows. Even the critiques taste better under coffee's influence. Asterisk. Historians note this was precisely the fuel for rulers' anxieties. The more people gathered to drink and chat, the more powerful their voices became. Imagine trying to rule an empire, knowing that somewhere, in dozens of dim little shops, citizens were weaving entire dramas about you over cups of steaming liquid. It would be like waking up and realizing every barista in town had an opinion about your policies and that they were serving their opinions with foam on top. Asterisk the fun detail. Even travelers noted how lively Ottoman coffeehouse chatter was, comparing it to a market of ideas. And tucked inside, those ideas came improvisations of theater, puppet shows, and song. One evening might end with deep debates over law. Another might conclude with light-hearted imitations of court officials. Few places blurred the line between importance and play so cleverly. Asterisk, you close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen. The decibels ebb and flow like seas against a quiet coastline, sometimes rising in laughter, sometimes dropping into murmured hums that barely brushed the lantern-lit floorboards. That cadence itself is calming. Every whispered scandal, every witty poem, every disputed price feels less like a threat and more like lullabies of life carrying on in the empire's bloodstream. Asterisk. And then, in your half-drowsy state, you wonder something historians still debate. Did the average man see coffee houses as harmless entertainment, or as sites of real subversion? Was that governor really mocked into changing his ways? Was a sultan's order really undone by gossip swirling faster than official decree? No one can say with certainty, which makes it all the more delightful. The mystery itself is part of the brew. Asterisk, so you lean back again, sipping from the dregs at the bottom of your cup. The foam may be gone now, but the words around you rise in its place, capable of buzzing just as much as caffeine. And perhaps, you think, this is why the rulers grew nervous, for this is not only it is a slow revolution in whispered sentences, a pot of words simmering just as steadily as coffee in the embers. You lean back on your wobbling stool, and suddenly the whispers you've been eavesdropping on take on a sharper edge. The laughter still ripples, the dice still rattle in the corner, yet hovering through the haze of roasted beans and tobacco smoke is something else. Suspicion, not from the drinkers, but from those watching the drinkers. You glance toward the door. It creaks open. In steps the shadow of authority. Ottoman officials were never far from these gatherings, even if they weren't always visible. Asterisk here, in the golden glow of lantern light, one of history's Adar dramas begins. The struggle between an empire built on order and a drink that seemed harmless, but could stir oceans of conversation wide enough to rock the throne itself. Sacrilegious whispers against wine or taverns might be predictable, but coffee, black, bitter, foamy coffee, lurking in tiny cups like a suspiciously innocent co-conspirator. Asterisk, the rulers knew coffeehouses weren't just social hubs. They were theaters of dissent in miniature. Sultans, ever watchful, wondered what really brewed inside. Was it only beans and jokes, or was it sedition swirling in the steam? And so began one of the strangest quarrels between power and beverage. At various points through Ottoman history, the hammer came down, bans declared, punishments threatened, coffeehouses shuddered. Imagine the scene: an imperial decree issued not against weapons, not against enemies at the gates, but against a dark liquid brewed in small copper pots. Yes, you can picture the parchment rolled open grandly, its words trembling with importance. No coffee for you. Historians agree that Sultan Murad IV, ruling in the early 17th century, was particularly aggressive. His reign brought fierce prescriptions executions, even for coffeehouse patrons, if accounts are to be believed. Murad was concerned with law and order, perhaps even with moral rigor, cracking down not only on coffee but on tobacco and alcohol too. The irony: he himself was rumored to sneak cups when nobody was looking. Picture him in his palace, sneaking down dim marble halls at night, whispering to a servant, "Just one foam-crowned cup, no one needs to know." And here's where things get beautifully absurd. The crackdown only seems to have made coffee more attractive. Ban anything, and suddenly it tastes better when brewed in secret. People found ways around restrictions, running shadow coffeehouses hidden behind fabric stalls or brewing early in the quiet of dawn. Little pockets of rebellion in porcelain cups. The bans became a kind of cat-and-mouse game. Authorities close one shop, another springs up 3 doors down, as though coffee itself were playing tricks on empire. Historians still wonder, were the bans really about health and morality, as written, or were they mainly about fear of too much unmonitored talking? After all, coffee keeps people awake, and awake people ask questions, sometimes annoying ones. You can almost hear a sultan sigh. It's difficult enough running an empire. And now, every man with a mustache thinks he's a philosopher after 2 cups. The humor sparkles in hindsight, but for the drinkers of the time, the tension was real. Each sip carried the possibility, however, milled of official displeasure. The irony is that a single says couldn't topple a throne, but the conversations it encouraged, that was harder to control. The bans would be enforced, lifted, then reinstated again over decades. Coffeehouses became a barometer of the sultan's mood at court, tolerated when rulers leaned toward leniency, targeted when rulers grew paranoid. And yet somehow, despite rolling decrees and stern proclamations, the drink itself endured. Travelers to Istanbul in these centuries were often delighted or shocked to discover entire rows of coffeehouses buzzing with activity. Even in eras of supposed prohibition, were authorities turning a blind eye? Were bribes exchanged in steaming cups? How selective was the enforcement, really? The answer remains an open question, blurred and hazy, like smoke drifting into rafters. But the delightful detail is this: bans couldn't break the ritual. They could intimidate, frighten, even destroy individual spaces. But the drink itself, leapt, foamy, stubborn, kept returning. It became less a rebellion, and more a quiet inevitability. A sign that human beings will sometimes cling to small joys with greater stubbornness than to monumental decrees. As you watch in the coffeehouse tonight, no officials barge in. You're left instead with a sense of unease brushed into the room, the way a cool draft reminds sleepers of winter. You sense the precariousness of this space, the unspoken risk woven through the laughter. Yet strangely, that awareness only makes the chatter warmer, the cups more cherished, the foam more precious. Each sip feels like a tiny, triumphant act of survival, enjoyed with quiet grins and lowered voices. And while you listen to the shuffle of dice and the murmur of politics disguised as poetry, you can't help but smile at the absurdity of human history, the image of emperors swinging the weight of courts, armies, and decrees at a beverage, and somehow still losing. The memory of crackdowns still hums faintly in the air, but now you notice a strange flicker of defiance, the rhythm of quiet persistence. The bans may have swept through the empire like sudden storms, yet the coffeehouses kept returning like stubborn weeds between cobblestones, and where coffeehouses were shuttered, the ritual shifted into kitchens, back rooms, hidden shops that blurred into the scent of spice stalls. Asterisk, it's early dawn in your imagination now. Long before the city stretches awake, the streets are empty except for cats brushing silently against stone walls and the slow stalk of a sleepy watchman. A shutter creaks open on a side street, so cautiously you'd think it was a secret door to another world. Inside, a glow blossoms, softer than a lamp, but steadier than the moon. You step in quietly. The air is heavy with the hushed energy of rule-breaking, but gentle rule-breaking. The kind that doesn't want to riot, just to sip. Asterisk, this is a secret gathering over coffee. A pot glints in embers. Cups clink lightly against the copper tray, as though the sound itself might betray them. Men and women here bend their voices low, their laughter muffled behind careful palms. What they share isn't just caffeine, it's solidarity. Drinking together, while decrees forbade it. Was itself a declaration. We belong to this ritual, whether law agrees or not. Asterisk. One of the quirks hiding in history's footnotes is how quickly these illicit brews became wrapped in elaborate codes. Some shops pretended to be selling soup or herbal drinks. Behind the counter, though, was the familiar says, working overtime. You picture a customer ordering lentil stew with a wink, only to be handed a steaming porcelain cup of coffee crowned in foam. Nothing tastes like lentils. Everything tastes like quiet rebellion. Asterisk, historians point out that bands bred creativity where you couldn't brew openly. You brewed quietly, and where you couldn't drink in groups. You visited trusted kitchens just before sunrise. The practice of hosting small circles for coffee became as treasured as the drink itself, preparing the ground for household rituals that long outlasted imperial suspicion. That's the paradox here. The attempts to eradicate coffee only deepened its cultural roots, weaving it tighter into the fabric of family life. Asterisk, imagine yourself seated in such a hidden room now. Shadows drop long across the plaster walls, and the aroma of ground beans mixes with the faint ash from the fire. A few figures sit close, faces half-lit, cups balanced on knees. Someone makes a joke quiet, but bold enough to earn a ripple of muffled laughter. Another stirs sugar in her cup with an exaggerated flourish as if to say, "Look at us, breaking all the rules, with tiny spoons." The rebellion is far too gentle to spark riots, but just enough to kindle warmth in your chest. Asterisk. The question historians still toss between themselves is how harshly these hidden gatherings were ever punished. Were patrols really prowling through winding lanes to sniff out wayward foam? Records describe stern enforcements, but you can imagine local officers shrugging, sneaking cups themselves, or quietly accepting coffee-scented bribes. Was everyone truly at risk of severe judgment, or was enforcement more symbol than reality? Nobody agrees fully, which makes it a delightful vagueness for bedtime pondering. Asterisk, and maybe this is why the secret meetings feel so dreamlike. No banners, no slogans, just quiet cups, steaming in the dawn. There is something tender about this form of resistance. Not defiance with swords or stones, but defiance with spoons and saucers. The Empire tried to enforce silence, but instead, these mornings hummed with soft chatter. Rebellion disguised as hospitality. Asterisk. It's one of history's coziest contradictions, that something as small as a sesfo never truly stayed hidden, because the fragrance betrayed it everywhere. You can almost see neighbors smiling knowingly as they pass by doors where smoke slips out, carrying the unmistakable perfume of roasted beans. If silence had a scent, it wouldn't be this one. This is the scent of persistence, sweetened with sugar, shared in porcelain cups before the city fully opens its eyes. Asterisk, you cradle your own imaginary cup now, steaming quietly in your hands. The rules of the Empire feel far away. Inside these walls, the only decree is that coffee binds friends tighter, brings laughter back to hushed rooms, and keeps dawn glowing a little brighter. Outside, guards shuffle their patrols. Inside, you take your next sip, daring to enjoy the foam with as much ceremony as if you were a sultan yourself. And tonight, you know the truth. No empire has ever fully stood against the power of little rituals, especially ones as deliciously persistent as this. The sun has risen a little higher now in your drifting journey, and it nudges you down a quieter street, away from the bustle of men with dice and whispered politics, into the softer heart of the home. You've sipped your fill with merchants and philosophers, but here, in the warmth of kitchens, the story of coffee changes. You cross the threshold into an Ottoman household, and immediately you notice that the coffee ritual, while smaller in setting, feels enormous in meaning. Asterisk inside. Women gather around the hearth. You smell bread baking somewhere deeper in the home, but front and center on the embers, as ever, is the sez. This one is polished until it gleams, perhaps saved for special moments. It hangs on a hook, its copper sides reflecting the fire, waiting for its role not just as a drink maker, but as a judge, an ambassador, and surprisingly a matchmaker. Asterisk. Here's the detail the coffee house outside doesn't tell you. Women wielded the bean as a language of their own. In Ottoman culture, when suitors visited families in hopes of arranging a marriage, coffee was at the center of negotiations. Potential brides were expected to brew the drink, presenting cups not only to the guest, but to his entire family. It wasn't the taste of the roast alone that mattered. It was the grace of preparation, the steadiness of the foam, the subtle gestures as coffee passed from hand to hand. A careless pour might invite whispers. A flawless cup could sweeten prospects more than a dowry ever could. Asterisk. And here, history keeps a gem of humor. If the young woman wasn't thrilled with the match, she could send her answer in the coffee itself. The drink might arrive unsweetened, bitter as protest. A polite but unmistakable no. Imagine the young man's nervous sip, expecting sweetness but tasting pure, dark defiance. You can't help but grin because coffee, of all things, had the power to convey an entire verdict. Years of negotiation, reduced to sugar or the lack of it. Asterisk, of course. In many homes, the ritual was handled more warmly. Women welcomed guests with cups, their ease and attentiveness conveying hospitality. Coffee here became shorthand for respect, patience, and even love. To serve a steaming cup to someone was to say, "You're worth the effort of my time." Even today in Turkish households, refusing a cup borders on rude. A tiny porcelain vessel has more to say than a 4-page letter. Asterisk, but beyond marriage rituals, coffee was the fabric of everyday domestic life. Talk of markets, stories of neighbors, songs hummed from grandmothers to children, all happened with a sezv simmering nearby. What strikes you is how equalizing it feels. The same beans you saw stirring up politics in the coffee house are now bubbling on the hearth, binding together family members and friends. Here, the point isn't rebellion but intimacy, conversation, and comfort. Asterisk, you catch a scene. A mother sliding the sezv into embers, watching over it like a hawk. Her daughter, seated nearby, sneaks a glance at you like she knows the performance is important. When the foam rises, the mother divides it carefully between cups, restoring balance, making sure none is served bare. That tiny act ensuring fairness even in froths says something profound. Coffee wasn't just drink, it was etiquette, diplomacy in miniature. Asterisk, historians like to emphasize this duality. In public, coffee was charged with politics. In private, it shaped relationships. They note that in Ottoman homes, the quality of coffee mirrored the quality of character. Clumsy brewing might pass in the anonymity of the bazaar, but in a living room ritual, it carried more meaning. Was that cup sweet because it reflected sweetness of intent? Was it bitter with unspoken feeling? Did the foam collapse because the brewer rushed, or because the coals weren't steady enough? Future in-laws and family elders might nod sagely or frown all, based on that one little cup. Asterisk, and even now, Historians still puzzle just how powerful was this custom of bitter coffee as refusal. Was it widespread practice, or charming folklore woven into memory after the fact? No records give certainty. Perhaps some young women really did pour messages cup by cup, politely but firmly declaring their stance. Others might have relied on chemistry, character, or sheer stubbornness instead. But the story survives, lingering clearly enough for you to imagine the exact moment. Two sets of eyes locking on a foam-crowned cup heavy with meaning. Asterisk. The air in this domestic room is quieter than in the coffee house, but it wraps you more snugly. The crackle of coals, the gentle chatter of women, the laughter of children spilling in from another room, of it folds around the cesp with soft inevitability. You lift your imaginary cup. It tastes the same, but somehow fuller now, enriched not just by beans, but by the weight of friendships, of whispered truths, of love chosen or refused. Asterisk. You set your cup down gently this time, and with it, you sense the hearth whispering back at you that coffee is more than ritual, more than politics. It is the everyday heartbeat of homes, small and steady, sweet or bitter as life itself. The hearth has quieted now, the embers flickering low, and yet your steps carry you onward into the places where coffee was not just sipped in quiet kitchens, nor whispered over dice games, but woven directly into ceremony itself. Today we speak casually of coffee breaks, but in the Ottoman world, coffee was not a break from ceremony, was the ceremony. Asterisk. Picture yourself drifting through the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace. The lamps glow with steady light. The tiled walls glitter with blue and white geometry that seems more alive than stone should. The air is sweet, fragrant with rosewater that hides in corners. And beyond all of that, you catch it again, the unmistakable aroma of coffee. It follows you like a loyal shadow, and then you stumble upon it. The Kavesi Baka, the chief coffee maker, a court official whose full-time duty was ensuring that the Sultan's coffee arrived exactly as it should. Yes, in this empire, there was a man with a title whose importance rested entirely in a sesvasterisk. Historians delight in the symbolism of this position. Imagine how carefully coffee was treated if the Sultan appointed a senior palace official just to guard the foam and spoon sugar. The Kavesabaka even acted as confidant, carrying secrets along with brewing duties. It makes you smile, doesn't it? That diplomacy and intrigue could filter through beans as smoothly as water through a asterisk. But the court wasn't the only stage. Coffee became a standard of hospitality, a first act to almost any meeting of weight. To set a cup before a guest was not casual, it was a small performance, announcing respect. Hosts didn't rush. The sesve was handled like an heirloom, every step of brewing a statement. We honor you. We slow time for you. We crown your drink with foam. Asterisk. And then there is the part that always makes listeners chuckle. Those elaborate Ottoman marriage negotiations we brushed against in kitchens, extended into full ceremonial form when families met formally. Guests would be received with coffee, served usually in pairs of gilded cups, resting in silver stands. Imagine the gleam of metal against porcelain, the foam puffed perfectly on top, the sweetness meticulously aligned with whatever subtle message the host wished to send. Was it a diplomatic dance? Of course, but with coffee as its leading partner. Asterisk. It wasn't all sweetness, of course. Just as one cup might welcome, another could gently scold. Bitter coffee presented to someone of rank might hint at an oversweetened cup might be an attempt at flattery or appeasement. The line between refreshment and rhetoric was paper thin, and the Ottomans managed to balance it all on saucers without spilling. You imagine courtiers holding their porcelain, sniffing quietly for clues, trying to decipher whether this one had too much honey to be coincidence. Asterisk. One quirky fact. During Ramadan, coffee often carried ceremonial weight as the drink used to ease people back into the evening after a day of fasting. Families broke bread and dates. Yes, but coffee was part of the ritual of returning to conversation and wakefulness. Lift the cup, sip gently, foam kissing your lips, the signal that night's celebrations had truly begun. It makes sense, doesn't it? A drink powerful enough to sustain mystics in Yemen would naturally become a friend to nights of devotion and patience. Still, historians ask, did the Ottomans formalize coffee as ceremony consciously, codifying every gesture, or did it evolve unintentionally? Little habits hardening over years until they felt inevitable. Was the kavesa box appointment at court a deliberate recognition of power, or simply an indulgence by coffee-loving sultans? The line blurs somewhere between choice and chance, leaving us only tantalizing fragments. You hold your own imaginary cup with new awareness now. No longer is it a quiet partner to whispered gossip. This is a prop in Empire's theater, a badge of welcome, an instrument of love, a subtle thumbprint of diplomacy. Each sip you take seems heavier with meaning now, heavier than porcelain should allow. And yet, for all its ceremony, coffee never grew stiff. The cups may gleam in silver, the titled chief coffee maker may sound grand, but the drink itself remains the same one you sipped in a smoky back room earlier. Thick, bitter, foamy, grounding. It bridges palace and marketplace, rich and poor, love and politics, home and state. Its ceremony is universal precisely because beneath the stage lights, all coffee asks is to be brewed with care, shared with company, sipped patiently. So you sip again, imagining sultan and fisherman alike, both raising their cups to the foam's crown, one gilded, one plain, but both carried by the same simple ritual. And here's the secret twist you can't ignore. Maybe the ceremony wasn't in the silver or the palace titles at all. Maybe the true ceremony was always in the act itself. Two people pausing, sharing, slowing down enough to let warmth linger between them. The palace corridors and gilded trays fade now, and you find yourself stepping into the sensory banquet that coffee inspired beyond ceremony. The endless variations of sweetness, spice, and subtle indulgence. Imagine, if you will, that your tongue is suddenly whisked away on a caravan through flavors. Because for all its mysteries and politics, Ottoman coffee culture was also about, quite simply, taste. You cradle a fresh cup, and unlike your last, this one greets you with a new perfume. Cardamom, a green, citrus warm spark that leaps into your nose before the bitterness has a chance to bite. In some households, a pinch of cardamom nestled into the sezv was the signature flourish, elevating coffee from simple wakeful potion to aromatic memory. In other kitchens, clove might slip into the mix, leaving behind a tingle like tiny fireworks on the tongue. On special occasions, cinnamon curled its red-brown sweetness into the foam. All these variations whispered stories of caravan goods. Spices carried like treasure over deserts and seas, blending trade with daily ritual. Sugar played its own starring role. By the 16th century, refined sugar drifted through Ottoman trade like snowflakes from distant fields, and coffee became one of its most elegant stages. Cups were served sad, unsweetened, or to medium sweet, or zekerli, quite sweet indeed. To order was to confess your preference, your personality. Bitter cups marked resilience or refusal. Medium sweet suggested balance. Very sweet was an embrace, perhaps even flattery, offered with a smile. There's humor in imagining merchants bargaining not with coin, but with just how much sugar each was willing to pour into his companion's cup. And let's not forget honey. In evenings when sugar was scarce or luxury called for novelty, golden threads of honey were stirred into cups, thick and fragrant, mingling with roasted beans until foam glistened like amber. You take a sip, and it clings to your lips, sticky and indulgent, a dessert hidden in a drink, a night's sweetness poured straight into your veins. Historians note how variations in brewing reflected not only taste but geography. Some regions leaned toward cardamom as essential, while others preferred unflavored coffee, bold and pure. This explains why, even today, Turkish, Arabic, and Balkan coffees each carry slightly different rules. But the Ottomans themselves often blurred these boundaries, experimenting, adapting, making each cup a passport across half the world. The empire didn't just expand territory, it expanded palates. It's delightful too. The little contradictions that taste spawned. Elite circles sometimes looked down on over-sweet coffee, branding it unsophisticated and in private. Even sultans took their sesfis crowned with sugar. Human taste has never entirely respected etiquette. Sweet tooth wins when no one is looking. You chuckle to yourself at the thought. An austere scholar, loudly declaring bitterness, builds moral character, only to sneak extra sugar cubes into his cup as soon as his friends turn away. And yet, there's an open question here. One historians still nudge around their tables. Did the Ottomans see coffee at its sugar honeyes, elevating the ritual, or slightly corrupting it? Was true coffee supposed to be black, gritty, foam-topped, unadorned, or was flavor the point, the proof of abundance and trade? The debate never resolves, so you're free to imagine the arguments playing out endlessly across taverns and kitchens. Purists on one stool, experimentalists on another, both insisting their foam had superior character. The beauty of it all is that each variation carried its own atmosphere. Cardamom cups were bright and lively, almost musical. Honeyed cups were soft, plush, like slipping into velvet slippers. Bitter cups were stern but clarifying. Sweetened cups were playful, indulgent, eager to please. And through them all carried the one solid thread: coffee binding people across classes and regions, united under a single liquid crown, yet delightfully fractured by personal choices at the bottom of each sesve*. You sip your own imagined mixture. You've chosen a honey-sweet cardamom blend this time, and the room around you softens again. The walls shimmer faintly with spices, cinnamon coils tracing patterns across the smoky rafters, cloves bursting tiny sparks in the background. Coffee in the Ottoman Empire wasn't just liquid fuel. It was art. It was negotiation. It was perfume you could taste and memory you could swallow. The empire may have guarded its borders fiercely, but within those cups it was porous, a melting pot of beans, sugar, spices, and human desires. And it could just be that the real empire was built here, not in palaces, not in battles, but in those little porcelain cups crowned with foam, dusted occasionally with cardamom, sweetened by sugar smuggled across continents, warming fingers and quieting hearts. The taste of cardamom lingers in your imagination as the room softens, but now your gaze is tugged outward beyond kitchens, beyond palaces, into the wide world of travel and trade. Your coffee isn't just a drink anymore, it's a map. Each curl of steam feels like a caravan's trail, each sip a sail unfurling into distance. If you cradle the cup long enough, you can almost hear camel bells jingling faintly in the foam. The Ottoman Empire sat at a crossroads of continents, and coffee was one of the treasures that moved along its veins of trade. You picture caravans lumbering through the Syrian desert, winding like slow rivers of cloth, leather, spices, and sacks of beans. Each bag is so tightly bound it bulges like a pillow, but softer, carrying the roasted promise of countless evenings. The camels plod on under sun and stars, leaving prints in the sand that vanish almost instantly, as though time itself erases their feet while preserving the beans they haul. Coffee traveled by land and by sea, both dhows gliding across the Red Sea from Yemen to Jet, caravans pressing up through Damascus toward Anatolia, merchants docking in Alexandria with secret stashes hidden under cinnamon and pepper. If you close your eyes, you can smell the confusion of the market's leather stretching under fingers. pepper stinging noses, frankincense burning in small corners. And through it all, that raspy, earthy scent of coffee. Inseparable now from global exchange. Asterisk, of course. These weren't colorless transactions. They were adventures coded into trade routes. A merchant dodging bandits in the desert. A sailor squinting against bright waves, worried his ship will spill its sacks of beans back to Neptune. A peddler negotiating in the shade of Aleppo's market arch, while roasted samples seduce passers-by. One humorous account, half legend, tells of an Ottoman pack animal gnawing into its master's cargo mid-journey, scattering beans across the ground. Whether the poor beast became jittery or immediately addicted, no one records. But it's a picture you like. Even the camels couldn't resist. Asterisk, and the Ottomans knew how central these flows were. Taxes and controls often ensured steady revenue, but smuggling was rampant. Imagine sacks swapped at night across borders, bribes handed to guards in the form of roasted beans, contraband coffee slipping through shadows while officials dozed. Here, the debate persists among historians. How much trade was official, and how much slipped under ledgers? The numbers blur, but the truth is simple. There were always more cups steaming on the tables than rulers could properly account for. Asterisk. The Silk Road, already a centuries-old ribbon through Asia, became coffee's artery, ferrying not only beans, but stories. Persian poets picked up on the drink, writing verses of wakeful nights. Travelers carried cups home as memories. And so, slowly, the bean shed its Yemeni cradle and put down invisible roots across the map. Every port, every caravan stop was another roadside celebration, as though the bean had wings as well as hooves. Asterisk, what makes it oddly soothing is how inevitable it feels in retrospect. Coffee was perfectly designed for travel. It packed easily. It stored well. It demanded companionship to drink properly. It was bitter enough to intrigue and flexible enough to soften with sugar and spice. Compared to fragile fruits or bulky grain, this tiny bean was both practical and poetic. No wonder it spread. No wonder it colonized kitchens faster than armies colonized borders. Asterisk, close your eyes again and listen. You hear the wind in ship sails, the creak of cartwheels on stone, the low grumble of camels. You follow routes out of Istanbul, east into Persia, south into Cairo, west across Ottoman Europe. Each trail glows faintly in your mind like paths lit by lanterns, and at every point along the way, someone is pouring from a sezb into a small porcelain cup, foam trembling briefly before quieting. Asterisk, historians wonder how much identity the drink carried from place to place. Did those who sipped it in Damascus taste it as Ottoman, Arabic, Yemeni, or simply as life itself? The answer never quite solidifies. Which is its own kind of beauty. Coffee was everyone's and no one's. A traveler that belonged easily wherever it landed. Asterisk, you take another sip of your imagined cup, and behind its taste you feel the map stretching. The whole empire stitched together across deserts and seized by something as fragile and unassuming as roasted beans and conversation. And you realize, before this drink went on to shape Europe's cafes or America's obsession, it traveled the roads and oceans of the Ottomans, learning to endure the miles, learning to thrive by being passed from one hand to another. The palace corridors and gilded trays fade now, and you find yourself stepping into the sensory banquet that coffee inspired beyond ceremony. The endless variations of sweetness, spice, and subtle indulgence. Imagine, if you will, that your tongue is suddenly whisked away on a caravan through flavors. Because for all its mysteries and politics, Ottoman coffee culture was also about, quite simply, taste. Asterisk, you cradle a fresh cup, and unlike your last, this one greets you with a new perfume. Cardamom, a green, citrus warm spark that leaps into your nose before the bitterness has a chance to bite. In some households, a pinch of cardamom nestled into the sezfu was the signature flourish, elevating coffee from simple wakeful potion to aromatic memory. In other kitchens, clove might slip into the mix, leaving behind a tingle like tiny fireworks on the tongue. On special occasions, cinnamon curled its red-brown sweetness into the foam. All these variations whispered stories of caravan goods. Spices carried like treasure over deserts and seas. Blending trade with daily ritual. Sugara. Sugar played its own starring role by the 16th century. Refined sugar drifted through Ottoman trade like snowflakes from distant fields, and coffee became one of its most elegant stages. Cups were served, sawed unsweetened, or to medium sweet, or zeekerly, quite sweet indeed. To order was to confess your preference, your personality. Bitter cups marked resilience or refusal. Medium sweet suggested balance. Very sweet was an embrace, perhaps even flattery, offered with a smile. There's humor in imagining merchants bargaining not with coin, but with just how much sugar each was willing to pour into his companion's cup. And let's not forget honey. In evenings when sugar was scarce, or luxury called for novelty, golden threads of honey were stirred into cups, thick and fragrant, mingling with roasted beans until foam glistened like amber. You take a sip and it clings to your lips, sticky and indulgent, a dessert hidden in a drink, a night's sweetness poured straight into your veins. Historians note how variations in brewing reflected not only taste, but geography. Some regions leaned toward cardamom as essential, while others preferred unflavored coffee, bold and pure. This explains why, even today, Turkish, Arabic, and Balkan coffees each carry slightly different rules, but the Ottomans themselves often blurred these boundaries, experimenting, adapting, making each cup a passport across half the world. The empire didn't just expand territory, it expanded palates. It's delightful too. The little contradictions that taste spawned. Elite circles sometimes looked down on, over sweet coffee, branding it, unsophisticated yet in private. Even sultans took their sesfes, crowned with sugar. Human taste has never entirely respected etiquette. Sweet tooth wins when no one is looking. You chuckle to yourself at the thought. An austere scholar, loudly declaring bitterness, builds moral character, only to sneak extra sugar cubes into his cup as soon as his friends turn away. And yet, there's an open question here. One historians still nudge around their tables. Did the Ottomans see coffee additives, sugar honey as elevating the ritual, or slightly corrupting it? Was true coffee supposed to be black, gritty, foam-topped, unadorned, or was flavor the point, the proof of abundance and trade? The debate never resolves, so you're free to imagine the arguments playing out endlessly across taverns and kitchens. Purists on one stool, experimentalists on another, both insisting their foam had superior character. The beauty of it all is that each variation carried its own atmosphere. Cardamom cups were bright and lively, almost musical. Honeyed cups were soft, plush, like slipping into velvet slippers. Bitter cups were stern, but clarifying. Sweetened cups were playful, indulgent, eager to please. And through them all carried the one solid thread. Coffee binding people across classes and regions, united under a single liquid crown. Yet delightfully fractured by personal choices at the bottom of each, says Vasterisk. You sip your own imagined mixture, you've chosen a honey-sweet cardamom blend this time, and the room around you softens again. The walls shimmer faintly with spices, cinnamon coils tracing patterns across the smoky rafters, cloves bursting tiny sparks in the background. Coffee in the Ottoman Empire wasn't just liquid fuel. It was art. It was negotiation. It was perfume you could taste and memory you could swallow. The empire may have guarded its borders fiercely, but within those cups it was porous, a melting pot of beans, sugar, spices, and human desires. And it could just be that the real empire was built here, not in palaces, not in battles, but in those little porcelain cups crowned with foam. dusted occasionally with cardamom, sweetened by sugar smuggled across continents, warming fingers and quieting hearts. Your journey tonight has stretched across deserts and seas with caravans and sails. But now the map pulls you farther still, past the Ottoman borders and into the curious tale of coffee's unexpected leap into Europe. You shuffle your way through steam and shadows, and when the curtain parts, you find yourself on the edge of Vienna in the late 17th century, a city that smells of bread and smoke, but not yet of coffee. At least, not until a certain siege changed everything. The story tumbles into legend. In 1683, the Ottomans besieged Vienna, a clash of empires and ambitions that shook Europe. When at last the Ottomans withdrew, leaving their camp behind, they left more than tents and weapons. They left sacks upon sacks of peculiar, oddly precious beans. The locals stared at the dark little seeds, unsure whether they were camel feed, spoiled grain, or something more mysterious. Can't you just picture the confusion? Farmers poking the sacks, shrugging, muttering, "What's this? Pebbles? Goat snacks?" Then stepped forward, a man named Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki, often stitched into this narrative as the heroic translator and opportunist. He had spent years in Ottoman lands. He knew languages, and, most conveniently, he knew coffee. Spotting Vienna's sudden inheritance, he seized the moment. The legend paints him, opening a shop soon after, brewing the mystery beans into steaming cups. But he wasn't foolish, he sweetened them. And he added milk. And thus, Viennese coffee culture was supposedly born, a softer cousin to the Ottoman brew, smoother on unfamiliar palates, lighter in bitterness, easier to love at first sip. Of course. Historians, with their penchant for debate, argue endlessly about the details. Some doubt Kulczycki's prominence, suggesting other merchants played bigger roles in spreading coffee. Was he an inventive hero, or just a poster child for a change already unfolding? The uncertainty lingers like steam. But what remains thrilling is that coffee's leap from Ottoman hearths to European streets was sparked, at least in part, by forgotten sacks abandoned at a battlefield's edge. Not the grandest introduction, but certainly a memorable one. Within decades, Europe was humming with its own coffee houses. They called them cafes, penny universities, salons of chatter. And though the drinks were often adapted, strained, softened, sometimes drowning under heaps of cream and sugar, each cup carried a faint echo of Ottoman cess, of those first foam crowns in smoky Istanbul corners. Every swirl of a Viennese spoon, every porcelain clink in a Parisian salon, whispered back to Yemeni hillsides, to Ottoman bazaars, to secret morning stovetops in Istanbul. Imagine yourself slipping into one of those new Viennese cafes. Chairs scrape against polished wood, windows glow with afternoon light, and men in wigs slightly askew, as wigs tend to be when conversations overrun schedules, sip at pale coffee. Platters of pastries parade past. This is Vienna, after all, where every drink arrives with sugar in solid form alongside it. You glance at the delicate porcelain cups and suppress a smile. No foam crowns here. No gritty sediments waiting to be read like fortunes. Instead, milk swirls languidly, and the whole effect feels like a cousin to what you drank earlier. Family. Yes, but a bit gentrified, a bit self-conscious. Yet history reveals another irony. While Ottomans wrestled with bans and suspicions of sedition, Europeans embraced cafes as civic institutions. In London, they became places where newspapers were read aloud. In Paris, where philosophies bloomed. And in Vienna, the city, once besieged, it became simply inseparable. Its cafes becoming the heartbeat of intellectual and cultural life. Picture it. Empires fought, men feared foam. But the drink spilled forward anyway, claiming new homes with the same stubbornness as fire beneath a seife. It's funny really, how this chapter reads like one of history's more whimsical accidents. An empire withdraws, Sacks of beans are left behind, and suddenly, Europe is hooked. Had the Ottomans carried their supplies with them, perhaps the story would have trailed on differently. Perhaps cafes would have arisen slower, or later, or not at all. Historians can only shrug here, because while weapons and treaties shaped borders, forgotten coffee beans helped shape cultures. Asterisk. You sip from your cup, this time a creamy Viennese concoction in a porcelain saucer, and it tastes very little like what you had earlier in Istanbul. Yet your mind refuses to sever the link. Both drinks are children of the same bean. One sipped in smoky defiance against a sultan's decree, the other in sunlit rooms where wigs and pastries met. And somewhere under all that sugar and cream still lingers the gritty shadow of Yemeni hillsides and the crown of Ottoman foam. You lean back from the strange sweetness of Viennese cream and sugar and drift forward again, across centuries, back into the hum of the present. The story hasn't ended with sultans, secret kitchens, or soldiers leaving sacks behind. If anything, the drink only grew bolder, outlasting palaces, empires, wigs, and decrees. And now, here you are, tracing how the Ottoman ritual still lingers like an echo, not just in Istanbul, but all across the places where cups are still small, foam is still essential, and beans still speak softly through embers. Asterisk, you're back in Turkey, walking down streets where modern cafes lean against centuries-old mosques, and neon signs hang above cobblestones that have long since lost count of how many boots crossed them. The air smells the same, sharp, roasted, textured with sugar. Even now, in 21st century Istanbul, a sezd gleams on a tray, waiting to deliver the same stubborn brew you watched form over embers long ago. It has new companions, smartphones glowing on tables, tourists snapping photos, but at its core, the ritual hasn't bent. Asterisk, and it's not just Turkey. You drift through the Balkans, where the same ritual plays on under different names. In Bosnia, in Serbia, in Greece, cups are still small. Thick sediment still puddles at the bottom. Fortunes are still red in dregs. A grandmother leans over her granddaughter's empty cup, squinting into the shapes of coffee grounds like a fortune teller at a carnival. Ah, she hums softly, a bird. This means news is coming soon. Whether she believes or not isn't the question. The act itself, this little ritual of prediction, keeps the culture stitched together across generations. Asterisk. Slide farther east, into the Middle East. In Lebanon and Syria, coffee remains a matter of welcoming. A guest enters, and before any serious talk begins, the sezvi is set on the stove. In Jordan, in Palestine, in Egypt, the story repeats. Coffee isn't a beverage, it's an act of respect. The foam still declares dignity, the sweetness level still carries meaning, and the pour still demands patience. The empire may have fractured, borders reshaped, governments toppled and rebuilt, but that one humble copper pot, that one small porcelain cup, remains untouchably constant. Asterisk, there's humor in the sight too. Today's travelers might crack open their laptops in a cafe, flipping between emails and digital maps, but in front of them is the same brew once whispered over in smoky Ottoman dens. Wi-Fi might hum louder than dice in the back, but the cup is the same, a crown of foam, a lingering bitterness, grains collecting like constellations at the bottom. Modernity hasn't replaced the ritual, it's just layered an extra soundtrack over it. Asterisk, here's a lesser-known detail that tickles curiosity. UNESCO declared Turkish coffee an item of intangible cultural heritage in 2013. Imagine that, a drink being enshrined not only on menus, but in World Heritage lists, officially preserved like an heirloom tapestry or a crumbling castle. Coffee had traveled so far, endured so much suspicion, survived so many bans, that it landed not as dangerous rebellion, but as celebrated art. That alone feels like proof of its stubborn persistence, doesn't it? The bean always wins in the long run. Asterisk, and yet, amidst all these honors and global spreads, The same questions that haunted sultans and poets remain unsolved. Why does a humble drink inspire such loyalty and meaning? How can foam, sugar, and spice sustain friendships, woo brides, whisper politics, soothe grief, and crown love stories? Historians nod and take notes. Philosophers sip and shrug. No one agrees. The mystery curls through centuries like steam from the Suez, warm and unsolvable. Asterisk, you sip your own imaginary cup once more, just as you began. Foam first, bitterness after, sweetness layered somewhere in between, and with each swallow, you feel the centuries sliding together. A Yemeni mystic whispering prayers at dawn, a sultan sneaking a forbidden cup, a Viennese wig badly powdered with sugar on his lips, a grandmother in Bosnia squinting at dregs, a sleepy traveler in Istanbul today commenting on their fortune at a tiny corner cafe, all of it swelling together into a ritual that, somehow, has resisted time's erosion. Asterisk, the Ottomans, for all their might, are gone. Their palaces echo mostly with tourists now, but coffee remains unchanged, not needing marble or decree to prove itself. That is the small miracle you cradled tonight. That one stubborn routine, a sessive, simmering in embers, survived longer than any throne. The story of your wandering cup is nearly come full circle. You started in a dim Ottoman coffee house, smoke clinging to rafters, dice rattling in wooden corners, foam trembling like a crown, and now, you sit at a quiet table, your final sip waiting. The last swirl of coffee is thick, heavy with grounds, darker than a midnight sky. When you tilt the porcelain, little ridges cling to the rim, half-formed constellations that beg to be read, like fortune maps pointing who knows where. Asterisk in Ottoman lore, this was always the secret encore, fortune-telling from coffee grounds, called fall. Once the cup was drained, it was tipped upside down onto a saucer, left to cool, then lifted with anticipation. The patterns inside were said to reveal messages. Birds meant news, lines meant journeys, circles meant unity or protection. Was it truly predictive magic, or just poetic imagination after too much caffeine? Historians still shrugged. But in the Ottoman world, it was less about answers and more about invitation. Coffee kept you talking, guessing, and storytelling, even after the last drop was gone. Asterisk, you swirl your own cup gently and stare. To you, the grounds look a little like mountains or maybe a cat. The person sitting across insists it's obviously a boat. A grandmother chimes in that it's a falcon, which can only mean travel or power. And suddenly everyone is laughing. Every guess a mirror revealing more about the guesser than about the cup. Isn't that the point, really? Each coffee fortune is a tiny reflection of the heart, holding it. Asterisk. It's funny to think, mighty sultans issued bans on coffee houses. Armies carried beans across deserts. Merchants smuggled them through ports guarded like treasure, and yet, here at the end of the ritual, the legacy of it all is people peering into porcelain cups, teasing each other with the shapes inside. The last sip crowns the empire not with decree or ceremony, but with playful speculation. Asterisk, you let your palm rest around the warmth of the cup. Foam has vanished, sweetness gone, but the comfort remains. The walls around you glow with spent lantern light. The chatter softens into murmurs, fading into drowsy sighs. You think of the Kavesabaka in royal palaces, and the women negotiating marriages with bitter or sweet cups. You think of Viennese cafes with wigs and pastries, and modern Turkish kitchens where children lick honey from spoons before sneaking sips of coffee when nobody's looking. They are all stitched into this one final taste. Asterisk, empires fall, thrones topple, streets rename themselves, and markets bend under new banners. But coffee, humble and elegant, remains. More than a drink, it is a thread, tying centuries to one another, connecting strangers and families alike, stitching you to the Ottoman night, even as you sit here, centuries later, cradling a cup in your own drowsy hands. Asterisk, you lift the porcelain for the last sip. It is thicker, darker, nearly grit. You tip your head back slowly, knowing this is no longer just a drink, it is memory made liquid, a final taste connecting you to poets, rebels, lovers, smugglers, sultans, and sleepy listeners like yourself. You smile faintly in the dimness, because you realize something simple. The Ottomans may have lost their empire, but their coffee is still reigning tonight in your hand. Asterisk, you set the cup down one last time, and as it cools against the wood, the story eases shut. A small, ordinary ritual has outlasted extraordinary power. It doesn't need armies, just beans, hot embers, foam like a crown. Asterisk, and now, so does your journey.